Welcome to Life on Pause, a podcast defining the experience of being a young adult with cancer. Each episode, we explore issues impacting young adults in and after treatment. I'm your host, Jill Robertson. Today, we have a powerful story that spans 3 generations. Our guest, Karen Powell, is a Penn State graduate from 2006, a former Lion ambassador, and is currently a nurse practitioner at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. But Karen is also a breast cancer survivor, diagnosed at age 39. What makes Karen's story particularly compelling is how breast cancer has woven through her family history in profoundly different ways. Her 2 grandmothers, both diagnosed with breast cancer, had dramatically different experiences and outcomes that would shape not only Karen's career path, but her own journey through diagnosis and treatment. In this episode, we'll hear how one grandmother's diagnosis in the 1960s, when she couldn't even sign her own surgical consent, led to a long life of survivorship. We'll also hear the heartbreaking story of Karen's other grandmother, who delayed treatment to care for her husband, and how witnessing hospice care at just 4 years old planted the seeds for Karen's calling as an oncology nurse. This is a conversation about family, resilience, and how the choices made by the women who came before us can illuminate the path forward. Let's dive in. So, welcome to Life on Pause, Karen.
Thank you so much for having me, Jill. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, thank you. What can you tell us about yourself and what your life was like at Penn State University and how you ended up attending college there?
I'm actually the first woman in my family to graduate college. So it really wasn't just me going to Penn State. And I carried my family and a lot of sacrifices they made to get to that dream of going to Penn State. And the very first time I went there, I actually toured it and immediately fell in love. Probably one of the first few times that I actually truly experienced love at first sight. And, I had such a great experience on my tour that ultimately that's what led to me to become the Lion Ambassador. While I was, giving tours and just, living the dream there, I studied biobehavioral health because I was unsure if whether or not I wanted to become a doctor or the nurse route. So ultimately, I ended up going to graduating with my undergrad in biobehavioral health and then going back for more and then getting my nursing degree there as well.
Congratulations. That is it's a long journey to get where you are professionally now. So, where did you grow up? Did you grow up in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, so I grew up in Philly. My father was a Philly police officer, and I come from a long line of blue collar workers. And we had a very close knit family. We were all within maybe 2 miles of each other. So I was raised by not only my parents but also my grandmothers. Did a great deal of you know being a big part of my childhood. And ironically enough, both of them were diagnosed with breast cancer at very different times in their lives and also had very different outcomes in the end.
How did you ultimately decide to pursue nursing and forward your education there?
Going back to my grandmothers. So both of them were diagnosed with breast cancer. So my mom's mom found a lump at the age of 32. She had 4 children at the time. And she had brought this to the attention of my grandfather, who encouraged her to get evaluated as soon as possible. And she was reluctant because, she had 4 kids and he had to take time off of work to, quote, babysit their children. So, and keep in mind, this was the 1960s. So I love her story because of how the signs of the times were read through it. So ultimately, she went to the doctor and called my grandfather, who then the doctor spoke to him and asked her his permission to remove her breast. And this is a long story short. I'm condensing a lot of this, but she didn't even have the opportunity to sign her own consent, which obviously is another story for another time. But so she went through her mastectomy, chemo, and radiation and lived to be 88 years old. And then my dad's mom, on the other hand, also felt a lump and she was around 60 at the time. And around this time, my grandfather was recently diagnosed with emphysema. So she put her own health aside to focus on my grandfather's needs. She was also a first generation American, and I think there was a little bit of a knowledge gap there, and a little bit of fear and stigma of over surrounding cancer. So she couldn't overcome that, and she ended up passing away at 63 from metastatic breast cancer after choosing not to undergo any treatment. And I was 4 years old when she passed away. So being surrounded in that space, there's a lot of vulnerability. And, when you're in hospice and you're exposed to hospice nurses at such a young age, that I realized that I always felt comfortable in that setting and that space where um, that it just felt like a natural fit. And that I think was the footings from an early age choosing my career path as an oncology nurse practitioner.
So, when your grandmothers were diagnosed, a couple of things that you touched on there. I mean, um, the times were different. It was striking to me how you said, it wasn't really up to your grandmother to make the decisions about her own body. Can you remember having any kind of specific conversations around what was going on at the time?
I remember my parents talking to me about my grandmother because we lived on the same street. So I was over there pretty frequently. So even though I was 4, I had pretty vivid memories of what was going on. And, you know, m- after she passed away, the conversation was um, I don't think I understand the complexity of finality at the time, but, there was a lot of conversation around. Illness and, how what happens, kind of to the body when all this is going on in a way that a 4-year-old would understand. So, the conversation was more focused on, uh, she's going to another place as opposed to exactly the context of her illness, if that makes sense. So as the conversation as I had gotten older, more layers of what was going on had come out, and I realized the sacred space that I was in at such a young age. And my other grandmother, who was, who was, ultimately ended up living a very long, robust life. Uh, she Seeing that in real time just gave me a front view look at survivorship and at how, early detection and treatment and navigating through such a difficult time, although it's a short time, it is a chapter, but it doesn't have to be the whole story. So she really gave me an insight into how how difficult a moment in time of your life can be, but it's not your entire life. And I think that is where my passion came of helping women through that chapter, because that chapter, even though it is so, it can, no matter how short or long it feels, it's a chapter. And it's the parts that follow that, you spend a lifetime rebuilding.
Yeah, I think that's something that people who don't go through a cancer diagnosis, it's hard to grasp what it's like to have that traumatic experience and then eventually figure out how you're going to grow from that beyond that and what the rest of your life is going to look like because cancer is becomes such a big part of your life, but it's not your entire story then.
I think a lot of it has to do with, um, as you move forward, having a sense of acceptance, accepting the fact that even though I had early stage cancer and it was, I guess, a best of a worst case scenario, so to speak, you always have this lingering thought in the back of your head, and that will never go away. That any ache, any pain, any any change, it'll always be something that I will always think, huh. And that is something that I have to learn to accept because that will be a part of my life forever. Some days are harder than others, but there's resilience in knowing that everybody in this lifetime will go through something, whether it's cancer or something, else that they need to overcome specifically related to their journey. Everybody has a journey.
Right. Right. So let me back up a little bit and talk about your kids a little bit. Tell us the ages of your kids and like, I think you have a pretty young daughter who might be around the same age as when your grandparents were diagnosed. And like, what was it like for you to try to put into words for your kids what was going on?
Yeah, so I have three sons and a daughter. My oldest son, Gavin, just turned 10 on July 4th. And I have Dean and Chase, who are twin boys. They're 22 minutes apart, and they were born on Easter Sunday. They're 8 years old now, and my daughter is she just turned 3.5. And the dynamics of them are all very interesting because um, they all get along so well, but they're all in such different places mentally. So, explaining to them what I had to go through was really trying to not only capture their age, but also capture how they are as individuals. So my one son is much more sensitive to the others. And, my son Dean is much more black and white. He's much more analytical and really wanted to know more facts than anything else. So um, what I ended up doing was I used the word I didn't use the word cancer, and not because I was reluctant to do so, but I don't know if they had the context to absorb such a heavy word. So before really diving into the word cancer, I wanted to explain a little bit about what I was having done and why. So told them I had cells in my chest like that were going crazy. So we talked about what a cell was and how tiny it was and how crazy cells can grow and get out of control. So I had to get them taken out. And because I needed to get them taken out, I needed to have a drain. So, if anything that was going to be visible, and boys are very visual creatures. So we ended up pulling up a drain, and I showed them what it looked like, and kind of what it felt like, and what it did. So, because of all things that I was going through, that would be the one thing that they would linger on because it was new and it was different and it was attached to me. So having an idea of, what was going to come out of it and how long it was going to be in place for really helped them in that process. And it really developed a greater bond between us because I was fully transparent. So I told them everything what was going on, but instead of using the words, we were more descriptive than anything else. And with my daughter, my my daughter, she at the time she was 2, so we didn't really dive too much into exactly what was going on with her, but surprisingly, like, she'll still remember the outfits I wore when I had my drain in place, which is hilarious to me. Like, there's certain pajamas that I still wear, and she's like, "Do you have the drains?" And I'm like, "No." But the boys have no idea.
Wow, that is so interesting. You just through the eyes of a child, you don't know what they're going to absorb and remember and bring up later. It's just so interesting.
Oh, 100%, and some of the boys are like, you know, my son Chase is like, "Wait, what drain? Oh, yeah." So
Well, yes, so you had it.
and I will say, I think the conversation had would have changed and would have been different if I needed chemotherapy because those physical changes are much more obvious. So, there would have needed to be another layer of a conversation if
Yeah.
that came to you.
Is there anything that you'd like want to share with our audience about like how you knew something was off in the beginning and what that was like just, kind of um from when you became aware that something was off with your health and just kind of the different ways that maybe you navigated things as opposed to somebody who hadn't worked in the healthcare field.
Yeah, that's a good question. So just for context, everything that was going on with my grandparents led my mother and I to get genetically tested, and we were both genetically negative. my mom has two sisters and herself, and none of which they're in their 60s and 70s now, and none of them have ever developed breast cancer in their life. I also have a sister. So all my first degree relatives with a genetic negative background led me to wait till 40 to get my mammography. Fast forward to July 29th, 2024. My husband was traveling for work, and I remember it being a very balmy, humid night, and I just tucked the kids away to bed, and I had the windows open and, listening to the crickets and answering work emails. And I had an itch in the side of my abdomen. So I subconsciously went like inside of my shirt to itch it. And on the way out, I happened to just graze something with the palm of my hand. And that's when my consciousness started to take over. And my initial thought was, whoa, that was new. What was that? So then I just turned full clinical on myself and just did a robust breast exam and was feeling my lymph nodes and feeling this mass, this little teeny thing that was smaller than a pea, probably half the size of my finger. It was hard, but it moved around. So I understand why women who are 39 years old with four children in a career would have likely dismissed it. And what separated the clinician side of me was I could feel irregular borders. And that's something that I wouldn't expect a person that wasn't in this field to be able to differentiate. So I went for my baseline mammography 2 days after, and myself, along with the radiologist, who's also my colleague, looked at the images together. And she leaned in very warmly and said, I know you know what this is, but we still need to get a biopsy. And as you're laying on that table and your head is spinning and with a million different thoughts, and what was 2 days ago, me laying in my bed, very zen, answering work emails to this moment, it's a whirlwind. And it's a whirlwind for everybody. And nothing prepares you for that moment when you're told that you have breast cancer. There's no education, no experience, and really there is nothing. I mean, it's a gut punch.
Thanks for listening to Life on Pause. Ideas or suggestions for future episodes? Feel free to share them with us. Make sure you like, subscribe, or follow us on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.